If you play the Caro Kann, want to start playing the Caro Kann, or face the Caro Kann as the white pieces, then you need to watch this video. I'm the Chess Centurion. I'm a 2000 rated player, and I've been playing the Caro Kann for the past several years with great success. Today's episode of the speedrun features an exchange Caro Kann defense, where slowly but surely the game turns into a wild tactical exchange. Blunders kind of everywhere, so make sure you stick around to the end of the game because I know you're going to enjoy it. And as per the title of the video, I can promise you're going to learn a lot. Alright, first game of the new year. My opponent opens with e4. No prizes for guessing what I'm going to play. We're playing with the Caro Kann. I've got a whole playlist which will be under this video dedicated to every video I've got on the channel in the Caro Kann defense. I love it so much. And my opponent goes d4, so of course we're going to respond with d5. And I'm expecting e5 because we've had that every single game so far in this series where we've played the Caro Kann. But my opponent actually goes for the exchange variation. So, of course, we take back with the pawn. That's the entire point of going c6 and d5. Taking with the queen would just be maybe a bad Scandinavian, although in the Scandinavian, the pawn tends to go to c6 anyway. But we're not playing the Scandi. If you want to, go for it, but I wouldn't recommend. Knight f3 is a mistake. You might be looking at that thinking, how on earth is knight f3 a mistake? White is controlling e5, which is an important square, and controlling the d4 square, which is white's only central pawn, right? Because black has two central pawns compared to white's one central pawn, because we've traded off our c-pawn, which is the point of the Caro. But the knight on f3 it should go to f3, but white needs to prepare by going h3. I will show you after the game in the analysis what white should be doing in this position. This isn't losing by any stretch of the imagination, but if you play the Caro Kann, you need to know these minor intricacies in the opening. Here, I believe bishop g4 is the best way to punish this move from white. What is white supposed to do? Well, white should start with the move bishop to d3. Bishop d3 takes away the f5 square for our bishop. Also just puts the bishop on a very nice diagonal because we are going to castle kingside at some point. And our bishop can't come to the g4 square because the queen would be controlling the square. The problem with knight to f3 is that, one, you don't control f5, so I could go bishop to f5, but you also disconnect the queen from the g4 square, giving me the g4 square. And this is kind of a passive setup from white. So don't get me wrong, white is not losing, but it's a suboptimal formation of the pieces. Like I said, I will show you in the analysis what white is supposed to do, how he should set up to really try and get as much out of the position as possible. Because the exchange Caro Kann, there's not that much in it for white. So if you're going to do it as the white pieces, you need to know the optimal setup to try and get something out of the opening. We're going to go knight f6 and knight c6. The knights go to f6 and c6 basically all the time. You don't really need to think too hard about it. My opponent goes h3. It is worth considering taking the knight, because if bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, and e6, we try to lock this bishop out of the game. Moves like c4, though, can be annoying, and white can build up a decent amount of pressure with moves like knight to c3. It might not necessarily be something to be concerned about, but I don't see a need to trade my bishop off here. Now, I may be wrong. We will see in the analysis whether the engine agrees with me or not. But I don't think there's any issues. This knight isn't coming to e5 to cause any damage anytime soon. If my opponent does move the knight, I'll happily trade bishops. And if, g4, there's no threat with that. I just drop my bishop back. g5 does nothing because I control the e4 square so well. So we're going to go e6. I'm not concerned about bishop to g5 moves. They don't scare me whatsoever. I can probably just go bishop to e7 in that case. Yeah, my opponent does go knight to e5. Interesting. So let me think. Taking is probably decent. Taking is probably decent. It is worth considering bishop to g6, because if my opponent takes and takes, we get an open file for the rook. well, semi-open file. And that's quite nice. We can probably just walk our king over to g8 if that were to happen. But it doesn't feel great because white doesn't have to go along with my plan. A move like f4 does look a little bit intimidating. For example, if I take and queen takes, it is difficult to dislodge the knight on e5 because the queen is lending the knight extra support. So that's my only real issue with it. If I drop my bishop back, this knight isn't quite as well defended because the bishop blocks up the e-file for white. So that's worth noting. If something like takes, knight e4 isn't that good because of moves like knight to d2, and I just have to trade my knight off. And that's a lot of moves to make with my knight just to trade it off. I quite like controlling the square, so I don't want to jump my knight in preemptively. So I do feel like bishop g6 might be the move. It might have been better to take on f3. It's hard to say. I could consider taking on e5. I could. And if bishop takes h5, then probably take. Oh no, takes falls into d takes e5 and my knight gets trapped. So if takes, I'd have to retreat this knight back to c6. The bishop would probably go to f3, bishop d6. And the position's okay for black, but I don't love it. I don't love it. I'm going to drop the bishop back to g6. And we will face the consequences of our actions here. Again, there is a very, very good chance that I should have taken on f3 in this position. We will see after the game whether that was the wrong decision that I made. But this is still a very solid setup. This bishop will come to e7 or d6, one of those squares. This pin of bishop to g5 isn't all that concerning. I really don't care too much about it. It's not very threatening. We can block with bishop to e7. Not really a problem. Like something like bishop to g5, bishop e7, knight d2. We can always do like knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, and knight to d7, or even knight to e4, and try and trade the dark squared bishops off. That's a very comfortable position for black to play. But my opponent takes, and that feels wrong. It feels wrong because oh yeah, that's definitely not the move. That doesn't do anything. I don't care if this knight gets pinned. I'm gonna go bishop to d6, and we're gonna just try and point the cannons towards the white king side. I probably will play the move king to f8, just because if the rook gets on the e-file or the queen, I don't really want my e-pawn to be pinned. And I also would like to break this pin if possible, and maybe I can rotate my knight to a square like f5 to get involved in the attack. But my opponent takes. That's definitely not the right idea. I feel like, because on paper I'm rated over 100 points higher than my opponent, that he's just trying to trade off pieces as quickly as possible to try and get to a drawn position. That's not how this works. Not how this works, because while my opponent is spending loads of time trading pieces, like look, he literally spent 1-2 moves unnecessarily. I did nothing. I didn't play a6 to provoke him. I didn't try to defend my knight. I didn't threaten this bishop and force it to move. He just spent 2 turns while I did nothing. You get what I mean? Like, in the meantime, I developed my bishop. My pawn structure is better because I have the open b file now, and I'm probably going to go bishop to c7 to set up queen to d6. And I'm not expecting my opponent to hang mate or anything. I am well aware that my opponent will probably stop me somehow with f4 most likely. But I'm going to induce weaknesses by doing that. And if my opponent does something like taking on f6 now, again, that's 2 moves that he's going to play to take my other knight with his other bishop, and I haven't done anything to provoke him. Real quick, if you're enjoying the video, I'd really appreciate it if you can drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. It's really motivating for me. Let's get back to the game. Here I could have played a move like rook to h5, attacking the bishop and gone, look, are you going to take me or not? And then taking on f6 would make a little bit more sense because it would be like, okay, I've wasted a move, asking you what you're going to do. Whereas here, I'm setting up something completely different. I'm going on a completely different tangent, a completely different plan. And if my opponent takes now, then again, the bishop g5 move is kind of a waste because I didn't make him do anything. You get what I mean? I'm working on different plans while my opponent is simply focusing on trading pieces. Now that is if he takes my knight. We will see what he does. He won't necessarily do it, but he did do it on the other side of the board, so I'm kind of expecting it. I also considered to move rook to b8 in that position. That was my other candidate move, just targeting b2. But my opponent develops the knight, which is a very sensible move. I'm going to go queen to d6. And here I think I can get a nice position because after knight to f3 guarding the h2 square, I'm going to play knight to e4 attacking the bishop. And you might think, oh, the bishop's defended by the knight, but it's not. Because if knight f3, knight e4, and something like, I don't know, a4, let's just say, if I take on g5, white cannot take back because of mate. Similarly, white cannot take on f6 now because of mate, because I've set up this very strong battery. Again, this f4 move can be considered for white, trying to block off this diagonal. And after f4, the move knight to e4 doesn't make quite as much sense. My opponent does go for it. Because I don't want to trade the knights, I think my knight is going to be better than my opponent's knight. And now I kind of have to choose what I'm going to do, because my opponent stopped my initial threat, but f4 is quite weak, so the move knight to h5 comes to mind, putting pressure on the f4 pawn, and again, my opponent can't take the knight if I move the knight. So that's something like knight to h5. The move I would expect is probably queen to f3, guarding the f4 pawn. I mean, you could consider the move queen to g4, actually, which would make my plan of f6 attacking the bishop to remove it as a defender a bit more difficult. Because if knight h5, queen g4, f6, bishop to h4, I can't go ahead and take this pawn yet because the g6 pawn will hang. But if knight h5, queen g4, f6, bishop h4, there's a very good case to be made for the move g5. There's a very good case to be made for that move. Because if my opponent takes, then I give the check on h2. My opponent isn't mated, and he also controls the g3 square very well, so I can't give another check on g3. But I don't know, that is a difficult move to evaluate. That is actually quite difficult. I think White survives there. I think he survives. Okay, but if knight h5, queen g4, I don't have to play f6, of course. I can do something else. What else can I do? Not sure. Not sure. It feels like white is solid there. If f6, bishop h4, again, I don't have to play the move g5, so I can consider something else. I can consider knight to f4. And if bishop g3, because knight f4 also guards the g6 pawn, and bishop g3 trying to pin the knight to the queen, I can play, yeah, knight takes h3 check, and after takes I can pick up the bishop with check, forcing a queen trade. I hope you guys are able to keep up with some level of this. I will go over some of these lines in the analysis as well, so don't worry too much. But this is just kind of how you start to play chess as a higher rated player. I'm rated about 2000 or more online, and this is just the kind of calculation that you have to do. Either way, I think putting my knight on h5 is a good thing. And there's a very good chance my opponent doesn't go queen to g4. He could go queen to f3, but I think queen g4 is the most accurate move, so that's what I wanted to check. If something like g4, that is of no concern whatsoever. Of course, I can't take on f4 because yes, I'm attacking it 3 times compared to 2 defenders, but I'm defending it with a queen. So if g4 takes, I don't want to trade my queen for a rook. That would be a little bit silly. So if g4 is played, well, one, I can actually just retreat the knight and go, yo, you have massively weakened your h3 square. You probably shouldn't have done that. Or if g4, I can consider the move knight to g3, attacking the rook. And I always have the e4 square to bail out with. And I might lose a pawn if I go to e4, but I'm not losing the knight. So let's say something like g4, knight g3, rook f3, saving the rook and attacking the knight. I have rook to h3, threatening rook h1 check, picking up the queen. That's quite promising. You know, g4, knight g3, rook h3, rook f3, and then rook h3. Not obvious how white defends himself. Something like king g2 makes a lot of sense, although the move rook h1 still exists. It just doesn't come with a check. And the queen is in pretty dire straits, because I'm kind of skewering the queen and the rook, which is pretty hilarious, actually. That is quite funny. White might have to play a move like, let me just get this position back. If rook h1, might have to play rook to f1 in that position, and then I'm up a pawn, right? But my opponent does go queen g4, so he's done a good job finding that move. He's done a good job there. I do think that f6 is probably the best move. Now, something I have to consider is after bishop to h4, knight takes f4. What if rook takes f4? If rook takes f4, removing the knight from defending g6, queen takes and queen g6, I'm okay after king to f8. White has no major threats, but I need to check that, and there is a lot of threats going on for me in that position. So I think that, well, wait, one sec. If f6, bishop h4, knight f4, rook f4, if queen f4, my opponent has queen e6 check, but after king f8, there are no follow-up checks. So I think that works. Now, I do have to be careful about a rook getting to the e file, because e6 is tender, but worst case scenario, I think I can get away with a move like king to f7, defending e6 and f6, and it's difficult to imagine white being able to really add more attackers, so I think f6 is a perfectly fine move. It is just a little bit risky, obviously, because it weakens some of the important king-side squares, but you do have to be willing to play these risky moves to capitalize on advantages sometimes, because yes, this creates a positional weakness in my king's defense. Also worth noting, I can castle queenside anytime I want, and I still can castle kingside. Neither of my rooks or my king have moved yet, so that's also worth noting. But whilst positionally it makes me vulnerable, I think tactically and through proper calculation, which I have shown you guys over the past 10 minutes, through proper calculation, I can see, yeah, I think I'm actually good. I don't think there is a massive issue with playing f6. I just have to be careful, and I've calculated out the lines, and even if I'm given a check on one of these squares, I should be safe on the f8 square. So, there we go. And I mean, I have way bigger threats on my opponent. I mean, my queen and my bishop, my knight, and my rook are all pointing towards my opponent's king side. And this knight isn't really participating in the game yet. It needs another move to really get involved. This rook isn't participating in the game. So it's only, 4 pieces versus 3 pieces, but this bishop is very awkward if it goes to the h4 square. My opponent could consider taking on f6, and if pawn takes queen g6, king f8, I do control the f6 square, but it is uncomfortable. However, if bishop f6, I think it'd be more accurate to take with the knight. And if queen g6, then I have king to f8, and I think I prefer having this pawn on g7 rather than f6. And yeah, e6 will be vulnerable. Something like rook e1. I probably have to go rook e8 defending um, the pawn on e6, and then maybe I don't know f4. Sorry, f5 is scary, but I am up a bishop, so I just have to weather the storm there, and I can probably actually play the move e5 in that position, and I'm probably fine. Again, yes, I have calculated things out, and I think I'm winning, but like I said, f6 does create a lot of weaknesses and does give white potential tactical opportunities with moves like bishop f6, with moves like rook takes f4, sacking the exchange. These ideas do exist, but you've got to be brave sometimes. If you want to play good chess, if you want to play exciting chess, if you want to play accurate chess, you do have to be brave. You really do. You have to trust your calculation. You have to calculate properly. And sometimes you just need to go, look, I actually can't calculate every single line here, but everything I have calculated looks correct. And I think I've got enough here, so I'm going to go for it. Sometimes you do just have to say that and kind of trust your gut a little bit. And if you do mess up, then hey, analyze it afterwards, figure out what you did wrong. That's how you're going to improve. My throat is getting really dry. Mm. Whew, okay. So my opponent is still thinking, which is probably smart of him. He must be calculating moves like bishop to f6. That's got to be considered, I think. Um, I mean, there's no reason you wouldn't consider that at least, because of course he does. I assume he does see this queen g6 idea, but he doesn't go for it. He doesn't go for it, and I'm pretty sure we can take on f4. So let me just do one more round of calculation just to check. Knight f4, if rook f4, queen f4, queen g6, I go king f8. If the queen goes to e6, I go king f8, and I'm good, and I'm threatening lots of different things. So that doesn't work. If knight takes, my opponent, of course, can't take either of these because I'm controlling those squares. So if knight takes bishop g3, I can play knight h3 check. If pawn takes, I take the bishop, but actually, thinking about it, he could take with the queen. He could take with the queen, because both our queens are under attack. That's an interesting line, actually, because if I take the bishop, he takes my rook with check, I go king to f7, and if queen takes, check, king out, my opponent survives that attack, and I'm completely losing. So if here, if I take on h3, then he takes here, and my rook and my bishop are hanging, so I'm losing again. So if knight to f4, bishop g3, knight takes h3 doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. At least I don't think it works. So we do actually have the move g5 there, just securing the knight in place, which we could play. But I think we can actually go knight to e2 check. And the only move is queen takes e2, and then we take on g3 with the queen. And my opponent can shore up his defenses a little bit by going knight to f3, guarding the h2 square. But we have moves like rook to h3 in that position, and I think we're completely winning. If here, and my opponent doesn't take the knight and plays king to h2, then we just take on g2, and we're completely winning because we have 3 attackers on the bishop and he has 2 defenders. So, again, you do have to check these things one more time. It's a little bit easier to see when you're closer to the position as well. But pretty sure this works. Let's go for it. Let's go for it. And of course, if my opponent takes and just trades everything, then we'll be up an exchange and we'll be attacking this knight and attacking this bishop. And a move like knight to f3 guards the bishop, but I mean, we're completely winning. And we're also up a pawn by taking on f4. It's a little bit nerve-wracking to play moves like this because there are so many options for white, but there's also a lot of options for us. A lot of options for us, and you just got to calculate it out. You got to trust yourself, and you've got to effectively spend your time as well. I saved up a little bit of time. I think I've spent about 2 minutes in this position, even though I'd spent about 3 minutes the move before, just to double check. because if my opponent did go bishop g3 and I just played knight to h3 automatically, then I would have lost. Then I would have lost. Well, if my opponent found the right move anyway. So that would not be ideal. But yeah, I'm pretty sure knight to e2, and we don't have to worry about those problems. Although, when I say that, I do also realize that if bishop g3, knight e2, queen g3, queen e6 does exist, and after king to f8, there's no more checks, but you can play rook takes f6 check. And after pawn takes, queen takes, king g8, my queen defends the g6 square. So the only other check that white can give is queen e6 check. This is very complicated. Queen e6 check, king h7. And if my opponent tries to give a check on f7, king h6, and I'm safe. Again, crazy, crazy lines. If people say the Caro Kann is boring, bruv, I don't want to hear it. Don't want to hear it. The Caro Kann is not a boring opening. This stuff is wild. Absolutely wild what's going on here. And yeah, I think we're handling it well. Again, this line is kind of scary because of the sacrifice on f6 with the rook to open up my king, but my queen's defense of g6 is vital. If my queen didn't defend that square, my opponent might have just been able to perpetually check me or bring in, okay, not the rook to e8 because I'd be defending that square, but bring in the rook to f1 where my king is on the f-file and probably actually mate me. If my opponent could do that. So that would be very much less than ideal. Although I might have had ideas of bishop to f4 blocking a check on f1 because I'm up a lot of material, but ooh, yeah. This is a tough game. My opponent is playing very, very well. In terms of posing problems, although you could argue that all these problems are just in my head. Like, my opponent hasn't actually played any of these lines, I'm just coming up with them. And he might not see any of them, because to be fair, like, no offense to him, but he's only 1100 rated. I don't know many 1100s who would see those lines. But he is playing decently well so far. He's playing decently well. Although, like I say, I will cover why the opening that he played was a little bit wrong and how he could have played it better. I'll show you the ideal setup for white in that line. The ideal setup for black doesn't change too much, to be fair. The knights still come to squares like f6 and c6. King h1, that's an interesting move. Just stopping all my checks. Interesting move, okay. Huh. Well, g5 is the first move that comes to mind. Defending the knight, attacking the bishop. If g5, bishop g3 now, it's a bit different, because I can't move the knight with check. Complicates matters a little bit. I don't know where else my knight could go. If I bring my knight back to h5, then my opponent can play queen to g6 check. Not ideal. If I go king f7, guarding these pawns and shoring up my king's safety, then after bishop to g3, I probably have to go g5, defending my knight. And I think I'm fine there. I think I've got plenty of defense on the knight. And I can probably build up a bit of an attack on the h-file. So I think I'm going to do that. Let's go king f7 and also try to apply a little bit of pressure on the clock. Now these ideas don't do anything because these squares are defended. So that saves us a lot of hassle or potential hassle in the future. Yeah. Sorry, I was just checking quickly whether I should have considered rook h4, but I don't think it does anything. I can't really stop my opponent from doing this. It is worth noting as well, the geometry between these two knights makes me feel a lot better about the position, because when there's like one diagonal square between the placement of the two knights, it's like a common trope that it's difficult for the knights. Well, it doesn't even matter whether it's a knight, just a square in general. like 2 diagonal steps away from a knight. It takes a while for it to get there. So let's use b4 as an example. For white to geometrically get his knight there, he'd have to go 1, 2, 3, 4 moves. So similarly with the f4 square, for white to attack it, it would take 1, 2, 3 moves to apply pressure to it, right? Same with this square, but I counted it a bit weirdly. 1, 2, 3, and then you're applying pressure. So 3 moves to see the square, right? Which makes me feel a lot better about the position, because I don't have to worry too much about white adding more and more attackers. Now he could play a move like rook to f3, preparing rook to f1. Yes, I could move this knight, but that would weaken the f-file a little bit. Although I guess the f6 square is defended by the g7 pawn, so maybe I don't have to be concerned. If rook to f3, if rook f3, what's my plan? Well, my initial plan was rook h6, rook f1, rook h8, and then I'm threatening the move rook takes h3 potentially? Maybe? Like takes. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not threatening that. Difficult position. Really difficult position. But my opponent is down to a minute. He plays rook to a to e1, attacking my e6 pawn, which is reasonable. But it's defended well for the time being, although there could be tactics, maybe. But if takes and like rook takes, okay, maybe I can't take because of queen to e6. Maybe that's the idea. So I could go rook to e8, shoring up the defense. Could do that. What else can we do? I'd love to play rook h4, attacking the queen and defending the knight, but obviously I can't do that. Annoyingly. Let's try and find the best plan now, because we do have a bit of a time advantage. So I feel like we should try and make the most of it. Rook a to e8 does seem to be the most obvious move, but then I don't know what our plan is from there on. I don't know what we're doing, because all our pieces are doing something, right? So how do I improve further? A move like c5 I don't think makes sense, because I don't want to deflect my queen away from the diagonal or the e6 square. If rook b8, just b3. I don't know if I've accomplished anything by doing that. Hard to tell. Let me think. The move f5 seems to be screaming out to me, trying to kick this queen away, but currently g5 is under attack and it's difficult to defend. Now, if f5, queen g5, knight h3, if bishop d6, then knight takes g5, check, and I'm winning. But if here, well, if takes, I can take the bishop, or I can take on h3 first and then take the bishop. So f5 takes, knight h3, you can't take the knight. If you take the queen, then I take here with check. If f5 takes, there's no check that white can deliver, although there is this. Ooh, there is that check. That's really scary. Ah, tricky. Let's start with rook a8, try and maintain my time advantage, and I'm really trying to make this f5 move work. I feel like it might be the key to the position, but also my opponent could do something in the next couple of moves that changes everything. He could switch up his plan. Knight f3, does that change anything? Yeah, because if f5, he can take on g5 with check. It does change things. Okay. Let's think. Wait, if we take on h3, if he takes back, then we take here. If we take on h3 and queen takes, then we take here. And then that comes with check, right? So we win. If we take on h3 and he takes our queen, then we have knight f2 double check. King has to move. Take the queen, then he takes on c7. I don't think we're winning there. Don't think we're winning. Maybe bishop b8 is the move, setting that up. Oh my goodness, this is difficult. It might be bishop b8. Is my opponent threatening this? Is that a threat? Do we have to go king g6? No, because then this. Oh my, I'm so low on time. I don't know if this is a threat or not. That's terrifying though. Oh, that might be. That might be. That we might be losing if my opponent takes there. Because take, and this knight is so loose. Oh, we might be losing. And the knight's pinned. I really hope he doesn't see that. Maybe I had to go king g8. That might have been the move. Okay, he takes. That makes my life easier. Of course, I'm not going to take because of the knight moving with check, so I have to take with the pawn. And now I think we're good. Now we're good. Oh my goodness, I'm pretty sure my opponent could have won there. Oof. Okay, well now we're just up a pawn, and this pawn is a problem for white because it's so well defended by the bishop. Both very low on time though, so anything could happen. My attacking opportunities are kind of gone because this diagonal's blocked up, and h3 is very well defended considering I've only got a rook attacking it. The move rook h6 is very tempting, trying to go rook to g6 ideas. Yeah, let's play it. This is also, well, because the thing is, if I go here, then queen to h5 is annoying. Okay, he goes knight to h4, stopping this. Makes sense. I think I just double up. This is still defended, okay. This is defended, okay. We're attacking the knight. g3 could be played if takes... No. What? Oh, if I take here, then he takes there. But I don't have to do that. I can take the knight instead. Really interesting idea from my opponent. But I think I just take the knight. And I'm pretty sure that's winning. I am sure I've missed some insane attacking tactical ideas this game. I'm sure I have, but fortunately we're going to get away with it. And after queen takes, the game is completely over. We're up way too much material. We've got checkmate threats on the board. And yeah, let's just clean up now. We're up so much material. Very well played to my opponent. Rook f2 is the ideal move, by the way, so my opponent stops that. Very well played from my opponent. That was a really, really good game from him. Because I am rated 2000 elo, or more in some formats. My opponent is probably not rated 2000. So I, in theory, should be winning a lot easier than this. But no, he's played this incredibly well. So very well done to him. I'm not even going to engage with that pawn. I'm just going to play the move rook f2. And try and clean up a little bit, maybe double up on the second rank and team up with the bishop. Moves like bishop g3 would also trap the king on the back rank. Maybe I should have played that a little bit sooner, actually. That might have made a bit more sense, but yeah, okay. Let's attack this pawn, try and induce the move b4, and then let's double up on the second rank, obviously a very typical idea, and it should be game over soon enough. Or we're just going to win a load of pawns, which will also be basically game over. Yeah, I know I could have played a move like rook to c2 there, trying to pick up the c3 pawn, and to be fair, that might have baited the white rook forward and allowed me to deliver checkmate, but because of the bishop covering h2 and my rook covering here, I might have been able to play rook to c1 mate. But let's not overthink it too much. Let's not overthink it. Does that? No, that isn't a quick path to mate. Why am I struggling so much here? No, let's just go rook h2. Preparing this. Yeah, that doesn't work because my bishop defends the rook. That's why I put it on h2. But also so that if my opponent wanted to block here, then I would have rook to h1, skewering the king and the rook. Wow, what a game. What a game. I would really encourage you guys to stick around for the analysis. So let's just go straight into it. Wow. Okay, so let's get into the analysis. We have, if my computer will let me, e4, c6, d4, d5. Like I said, whole playlist dedicated to the Caro Kann down in somewhere down there. I don't know how it works exactly. Anyway, my opponent takes, which is the first time that we've seen anything other than the advanced variation in the speedrun so far. But my opponent takes, we take back, and the computer says that knight f3 is fine, by the way. It says it's completely fine, but I would consider it a bit of a mistake. Now, c4 is this is the Panov attack with c4, and this is quite difficult for black to navigate, but I do actually have a video about the Panov attack on my channel, so you can check that out if you want to learn what to do against the Panov attack. But my opponent plays knight to f3, obviously. Bishop d3 is kind of... Sorry, I can't tell if my webcam's lagging, by the way. I have no idea. But bishop d3 is kind of the main setup of this opening for white. And the point is that you don't allow bishop to f5, you don't allow bishop to g4, right? And after, well, I like to play the move knight to f6 here, because if white goes for a move like c3, then you can play bishop to g4 and kind of force your bishop onto the g4 square by defending that square with the knight. So in response to knight f6, can you figure out the best move for the white pieces? The move is h3. And h3 is very simple. It just stops bishop g4. And then the bishop basically is forced to get locked behind the pawn chain with e6. So something like knight c6, knight f. Now you put the knight on f3, by the way. Now that you've stopped bishop f5 and stopped bishop g4. And then after something like e6 here, the bishop is just locked behind the pawn chain, and there's not a whole lot that black can do about it. You can play setups with like g6 and bishop to f5, that is true, but they seem a little bit strange to me. So this is kind of the way that white should go about the position. My opponent, however, went knight to f3, and the computer actually doesn't think that bishop g4 is the best move here. It prefers knight c6 to begin with, and I think the point is that you want white to go bishop d3 and then you go bishop to g4, because of course the bishop kind of belongs on the e2 square, and it also cuts the connection of the queen to d4, which black has pressure on. And quite simply, I don't know whether you're actually threatening this, but you're kind of threatening to take the knight and then take on d4. Now, I went bishop g4 immediately, which bishop to e2 is not the best response to. h3 immediately is better, and the computer just wants to take, and after queen takes, go ahead with the normal development. You know, e6, knight f6, knight c6, bishop e7 or d6, and castling, maybe an h6 in there for good measure. But it's all fine for white and black. It's just an easy kind of position. My opponent goes bishop to e2 though. We go knight c6. c3, knight f6, just normal developing moves. The whole order doesn't really matter in this position. And then h3. And yeah, the computer does think it's slightly better to take, play e6, and after a move like bishop to f4, bishop d6, takes, castles. I suppose it's basically equal, and black is probably going to try and expand on the queen side with moves like b5, b4, which is very typical of the exchange Caro Kann. I do have some videos on my channel where that exact thing happens in a slightly different move order. But that's not what happens here. I retreat my bishop, which isn't perfect, but it isn't bad. Now g4 is actually the best move for white. And then queen b3. Interesting. You can kind of get caught out here with black, by the way. If you go queen c7, then bishop to f4 tries to deflect the queen. And if you take this, then queen b7 double attack is pretty bad for black. So you don't want to go queen to c7. This happens a lot in these kinds of lines. You probably want to go queen to c8 or queen to b6. Choose one of those squares instead. Again, that doesn't happen. My opponent castles. And then we go for e6, which is just a perfectly valid move. Knight e5 is played, which is it's a decent move. And we go bishop g6, which isn't the best line. So my issue was, with knight e5, I didn't like that after bishop h5, I can't take here because of de5, and my knight is a little bit trapped. Now I can go g6, and if g4, drop my knight back to g7, but this just looked very, very uncomfortable for me, so I didn't want to go for that line. Instead, it would have been better if takes just to drop the knight back, like I mentioned, but I didn't think that black had a whole lot here. I don't know, the computer says it's fine, but I didn't like the dynamics of the position particularly. So, like I said, the computer wanted bishop e2 and queen e2 here, and then just to play a move like bishop d6. And if, well, let's say bishop f4, just go queen c7, apply more pressure. Rook e1, castle, and I guess the computer just thinks it's a very equal position. And probably the plan for black is maybe rook a to c8 and then start to throw these pawns forward. Maybe try and put the knight on c4 or break with a move like b4. Those are typically the plans in exchange Caro Kann structures, but we go bishop to g6. And my opponent takes, which the computer says is alright. And by the way, bishop b5 is actually the best move, which my opponent did on the next turn. So maybe I was a bit harsh saying that that was a bad move. We'll see. But he takes, bishop b5. Okay, it's not a great move. That's alright. I mean, in this position, it makes a bit more sense because you have two attackers, whereas the way my opponent did it, he didn't have two attackers. And we go bishop d6, which is the best move, and then he takes, which is just odd. There was no need to take. There's no rush. Just develop. Or bishop g5 even. Pin both the knights. That's perfectly reasonable. Then if I play a move like queen b6, maybe you take then. Or maybe you play a move like queen e2, just defending. And then if I play a move like a6, you still don't have to take. You can take, but you can just retreat. You don't have to go all in. But my opponent does, without any reason. bc6, bishop g5. I go bishop to c7. I did consider the move queen to b8, which the computer thinks is the best move. I actually played this move in a recent game. It might have been yesterday's video, and we had another Caro Kann where the b2 pawn was weak and this diagonal was important. Maybe the idea is something like queen b8, let's say queen c1, knight e4 attacking the bishop, bishop e3. And then it wants to go g5, g4. Interesting. The reason I didn't do this is because I thought the queen on b8 would really struggle to get involved in the attack because I wanted to attack my opponent. So I went bishop c7 instead. Knight d2, queen d6, and f4 is a mistake. It's a mistake. So the best move is knight to f3. My plan was knight to e4 attacking the bishop. Bishop retreats, because like I said, if takes, you can't take because of mate. So if here, here, then white is fine. He's defending himself. But I don't know, moves like g5, they do look scary. They do look quite scary here because you can't take, and g4 is probably coming. Very difficult to play. Very difficult. But my opponent chooses f4. He chooses f4. And knight h5 is actually an inaccuracy. So c5 is the best move. c5 was on my mind a lot of times in this game, but I never really thought it was like really begging to be played. Now that's interesting because I thought it weakened this diagonal. The computer thinks I can just sidestep though. Or block with the queen, and if takes, take. Yeah, I don't understand that. Oh no, you take with the knight. Defending the pawn, what am I on about? And then if something like takes, knight takes, and yeah, black is definitely better. You're threatening the move f6 to win this bishop because it can't retreat. So I don't know how you're supposed to defend this really. Maybe f5, giving the bishop a way back. But just gf5, black is up a pawn, and the e4 square is awesome. Absolutely awesome. And also moves like knight to a4 could be a bit of an issue in the future. Knight d3 is very tempting. This bishop is a fantastic piece. And this pawn is a passed pawn, so it could potentially march through at the right moment. Knight h5 is not the best move, though. My opponent goes queen g4. Not the best move. It's the second best move after queen to c2. Queen c2 is a tough move to play, though, because you really get the sense that you need to defend your king side. So I completely understand queen g4. It was the move that I was expecting. Again, the computer wants c5. I went f6, which is a mistake. So like I said, these moves, they're risky. They are risky, and it is a mistake. And what did I say? If it does end up being a mistake, you just got to learn from it. Rook a to e1 is the best move, ignoring this threat and threatening rook e6 check, picking up the queen after king to f7, defending both squares. Bishop to h4, and f5 is the move the computer wants. Rook a to e1, rook a to e8 also. I think we just transposed to this position anyway, though, after bishop h4. Oh no, we took on f4, sorry. Which is not the best move. Queenside castle is actually the best move. And like I said in the game, I was able to castle at any point. I could also castle kingside if I really wanted to, although there's no point castling kingside. But yeah, knight f4. King h1 is a blunder. Why is that a blunder? Okay, well, firstly, I will mention what happens after bishop to g3. So my initial plan was knight to h3, but it doesn't work because of queen h3. And if I take the queen, then my opponent takes my queen, my bishop's hanging, and my rook is hanging. So if takes, I'm just down a rook. So then I was like, okay, knight to e2 check. I force queen e2, queen g3, queen takes e6 check, king f8. I was terrified of the move rook f6, but I realized that I was safe after king g8, queen e6, king h7, queen f7 check, and king h6. I am safe. But turns out that rook to f3 is winning for white. No, sorry, not winning, but better for white. Because if I give this check, the king just comes to f2 and it's completely safe. Crazy stuff. If queen d6, rook e1, take, and I can't really defend the c6 square. Actually, no, I can. Because if takes, I have bishop to g3 check, winning the rook. But here, I mean, it's equal material, but white is more active. Absolutely more active. That's obvious. But my opponent goes king h1, which loses in several ways. King f7 is not the way to punish it. So the favorite move of the computer is f5. f5, attacking the queen. If queen g5, then knight h3 attacks the queen, threatens queen to h2 mate. So queen g5 doesn't work. If queen g3, then g5. If queen g5, then we have the same line. If bishop g5, then knight h3. If queen d6, then knight takes g5 check. The queen can't go back because I'm just going to take, because the bishop covers that square also. So king moves, I take on d6, and I'm up a load of material. What, like up a piece and a pawn? Whoa, this is crazy. Okay. I also have the option of knight takes h3. The queen has to take to cover the mating square. And then g5, attacking the bishop. If the bishop takes, I take the queen, and then takes is mate. Crazy stuff. So after knight to f3, take. If knight takes, queen g3. And if queen takes, bishop takes, the knight is going to fall. So king f7 is not the best move, but it's the move I played. I maybe should have thought a bit longer, but that is really some really tough ideas to see. And my opponent goes bishop g3, best move. I go g5, the only move in the position to keep the advantage. I did consider moves like knight takes h3, and after bishop d6, knight f2 double check, king g1, knight g4, bishop c7. White is up a bishop for 2 pawns, and I thought that I couldn't win this. The best move for black here, and the only move that doesn't lose, is rook to h5. I guess trying to double up, because if you do get a rook to h1, then it is mate. So knight f3, rook 8 h8, knight e5 check. White has to find. That's a tough idea to find. That really is. So whether he would have found it or not, I don't know. But we go g5. We play the best move. Rook a to e1. We go rook a to e8. g6 is also playable, but we go rook a to e8. Knight f3. And here bishop b8 loses to knight g5, as I realized. Now king g8 is the best move, which I also realized after I realized this was a mistake. But it was too late at that point to take it back, of course. And here this doesn't work because it doesn't come with check and there's no pin on the f-file. So if knight takes g5 in this position, fg5, if queen g5, we can just take on h3, attacking the queen. There's no pin on the file. We attack the bishop. If you take here, then we take on g5 with check. King moves, we take on d6, and we're up 2 minor pieces. Bishop b8, though, allows knight takes g5. fg5, and just queen g5 was the move that I was expecting. And I was like, I don't know how to defend this position. There is one move that doesn't lose immediately. Try and find it. Queen e7 is the only move to try and hold on. And if bishop f4, queen g5, bishop g5 check, king g6, the material is 1 pawn up for the white pieces, bishop f4, rook h2 f8, and white can just liquidate here and try and win the pawn up endgame, but he takes on f4, which ruins his advantage completely. Now, I was what was I trying to play? What I was trying to accomplish with bishop b8 is if a move like a4 is played, then I'm winning. Then yeah. So the issue is that I wanted to go knight h3 in this position, but it didn't work because here, and I'm down a minor piece for 2 pawns. But my idea with bishop b8 is if white does nothing, then I can take on h3. Of course, if you take, then I just take your queen with check. So you have to take my queen. And then knight f2 double check, king moves, knight g4, and then the bishop isn't on c7, it's on b8. So when you take it, I take with the rook, and I'm just up 2 pawns. Right? Because b8, the bishop is defended, on c7, the bishop isn't defended. That was my plan with bishop to b8. But it didn't work. It didn't work because of knight g5, but my opponent missed it. He played bishop f4. gf4, best move. rook f2, and we go rook to h6, preparing potential double ups on the file, maybe rook to g6 at the right moment. My opponent goes knight to h4 though, which is a strange move. Of course, he's trying to prevent something from coming to g6, I assume. Doesn't really work though. We go rook e to h8, attacking the knight, and here my opponent throws the game away, although you can see why he did what he did. If something like knight to f3 is played, which is a bit more resilient, then my plan was rook to g6, attacking the queen and stopping queen to h5 by having the other rook on the h-file. And here, white actually can't save his queen. The best move is queen to h4, trading like this, and of course black is completely winning here. But my opponent took on f4, which was an interesting move, because if queen f4, I throw the game away after queen e6 check, king f8, and queen to e8 checkmate. My opponent, fair play to him, still managed to pose a checkmate threat even when he was completely lost. But of course I don't have to do that. And there's lots of other winning moves. g5 wins, a6 wins. Imagine I play a6 in this position. And if knight f3, then I take, because if queen e6, king g6, this isn't covered by the knight anymore. Okay. I can just imagine the Stockfish playing a6 in this position. That's hilarious. But obviously, rook h4 makes this a whole lot easier. There's nothing for white to do in this position. Queen g3, we take, and the game is completely over. Of course, we should try and stay accurate in the endgame, but there is nothing here for white. Now, what I probably should have done is gone rook to c2 to try and bait out the move rook e3 defending, because rook c1 would lead to mate, because the escape squares are covered. But okay, it doesn't really matter. We go rook b2, b4, rook f to f2, and deliver... Oh, bishop to h2 was the better way, controlling the g1 square, and there's nothing that white can do in this position to stop himself from getting mated. But it doesn't matter. Oh, we're also threatening if my opponent tries to, save the game somehow. We're also threatening this because the bishop is controlling the g1 square. But we go rook to h2, king g1, and rook to b1. After this is checkmate because the bishop controls the h2 square. So, pretty happy with that game. We made one blunder, but such an interesting tactical skirmish there over on the king side. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please drop a like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. If you want to see what happens when my opponent plays the advanced variation of the Caro Kann, check out the video that's appearing somewhere on the screen here. There's a very interesting positional game that occurs in this video, so I know that you're going to like it.